Tonight you're here for our March Q&A talks. And tonight we have Liz from the Center of Daring with us to discuss how to exercise allyship through civic engagement. Q&A Talks is made possible through grants from the Independence Area Community Chest and the American Library Association in partnership with the Independence Public Library. Q&A Talks connects parents and caregivers of LGBTQIA+ youth with the resources they need to ensure their youth can live authentically and safely. If you have any suggestions for any upcoming Q&A talks, please reach out to us or visit our website. We're always looking for suggestions. This program is all about making sure that parents have the resources and caregivers have the resources they need to help our youth grow up safely. Tonight, we are excited to have with us Liz, who is a champion for diversity, equity, and inclusion, who participates in active leadership within her community. She holds a master's degree in ESOL and bilingual education from Kansas State University and taught in Emporia, Kansas and San Antonio, Texas. In 2014, she co-founded GLSEN Kansas and spent years working toward a safer, more inclusive Kansas for LGBTQ youth. In May of 2021, she left GLSEN Kansas to focus on empowering Kansans through her leadership consulting business, Center of Daring. Please welcome Liz.
Thank you, Brandon. Thanks for having me. So I'm going to say I'm a lot. I much prefer doing presentations to an interactive audience because I think I get my energy from other people as an empath and extrovert. So I did prepare a presentation for you, and I want you to know if you're watching this live, you really have to watch it from beginning to end as we're going through. But if you're watching this recorded, I am kind of going to break it into two or three parts. And so we'll talk about a little bit about why I do the work I do, a little bit about what civic engagement is and how you can get engaged, and a little bit about how to do leadership in civic engagement, since I'm a leadership consultant and coach. So I'm going to get started with a little bit of background on me before I start the PowerPoint. Actually, it's a Canva presentation. So as Brandon introduced, I have all those things. I was a teacher long ago, now 20 years ago. I taught kindergarten and second grade. And I really realized then that one of my passions was making sure that our youth felt valued and safe and respected. And then I spent a long time not teaching and was kind of looking for my calling. Making sure that LGBTQ youth feel safe, valued, and respected in Kansas and across the world became a calling that I couldn't refuse. That's a whole nother story. That's a whole 2-hour talk in itself. But I decided to lean into a lot of discomfort and get re-engaged with schools and with working with youth, and accidentally kind of started doing allyship in Kansas through what was first called GLSEN Greater Wichita and then became GLSEN Kansas eventually as we moved statewide. So my background through that, for people that know me and know the story, they know I was not a confident leader at the beginning of any of the leadership I've ever done. They know it's been a lot of anxiety for me to speak in public and do presentations and even just conquer any of my fears to do any sort of political engagement. Also, those who really know me know that I was very apolitical really prior to GLSEN. And it wasn't that I didn't care about politics. It was just that I really had a lot of privilege. So a lot of politics didn't affect me in a way that affected my day-to-day life. And when I started working with GLSEN Kansas and I realized how politics affect our LGBTQ youth, I started getting engaged. I just saw a Facebook post that I posted yesterday, I saw it yesterday from a few years ago, from like 2018, where I was getting more politically engaged. And I said, I'm the reason for that saying, don't wake sleeping giants, because I'd been asleep on the whole political advocacy, getting engaged. But then once I was woken up, It was something that I poured everything into, all of my energy, making sure our youth were safe and trying to figure out how to best do that, how to best create a safe environment in safe Kansas. Since I started out not super courageous or competent in that realm, I eventually learned several skills. I got several tools. I went to Kansas Leadership Center, went through all of their classes, and got several certifications from them. I'm teach leadership trained and leadership coach trained through them. And all of those tools gave me a lot more of the confidence to be able to do this work without so much anxiety, right? Without so much not feeling like I was the right person or not feeling like I was qualified to do the work. So my job now as a leadership coach and consultant is to give those same kind of tools to other people who need them. I talk every day to somebody who I talk about them doing leadership in some way, whether it's civic engagement or some other thing they could do within their school or something, or their business. And they're like, that's not me. That can't be me. So my job is to help give people the resources, the education, the tools to empower them to do leadership in their communities or in their businesses and their organizations, to create safer, more inclusive environments for all Kansans or for all people outside of Kansas too. I do consulting outside of Kansas as well. But Kansas is where my heart is. So with that background, I want to give you all a few tools today. I'm gonna reference SB 484. It is an anti-trans bill that we're seeing right now in the state of Kansas, and advocates are fighting it. It is yet another bill that is attacking our trans youth in Kansas. We've seen multiple of these and fought multiple of these for several years. But I want to make sure that we can talk about the how, the what, right? The tools for how we can do some of this work. And so after the call, after this presentation, we're going to stop the live feed and everybody can join that wants to, and we'll talk more in depth about SB 484. But to keep this presentation just a little bit more usable at all times, I'm just going to go into the parts about leadership now. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to just make a note of my voice. My voice has been doing this for like 4 months, and I'm not entirely sure what it is. I'm seeing a doctor for it. So excuse my scratchy voice. So exercising allyship through civic engagement. This is why you're here, right? Civic engagement can mean a lot of things. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that, but I'm going to focus just on a few pieces of it. I'm also going to be looking over here because this is where I've shared a screen, and so I'm going to be all over the place. I'm going to start with allyship though. What is allyship? And I'm going to ask Brandon real quick, when I'm sharing this screen, can you see the Zoom stuff at the top as well?
You can see the PowerPoint. And
okay. I can see a whole Zoom strip too, so I wasn't sure what it was showing. Thank you for that. So allyship, what is allyship? When I worked with K through 12 schools through GLSEN, Kansas, to make sure that LGBTQ students felt safe, valued, and respected at school, we did a presentation that was called How to Do Allyship, right? It was all the principles for how to do allyship. And one of the first things we talked about was allyship is a verb. Allyship is action. You can't just say you're an ally without doing something. It has to be active, and it can't just be passive, right? So allyship has to be visible. It has to be things that you say, things that you do, things that you show the world. You know, there's that whole saying, actions speak louder than words. In this case, like words and actions can be necessary for allyship. Both of them are needed. You can't just be a passive bystander. So we'll go here. When I've been doing this work, you might be able to imagine that doing work in Kansas around a taboo topic like tackling homophobia and transphobia and racism we're going to have a lot of differing opinions in Kansas. There are a lot of different perspectives, a lot of people who don't see the world the way I see it, who don't necessarily believe and value the things that I believe and value. And this, a lot of the work that I've done, a lot of the realizations that I've had have been built on the experiences that I've had teaching teachers in how to do allyship. And so some of this content here is coming out of that. And actually it will be going into the book that I'm writing as well. But this quote by Anais Nin, I think is really an important one to understand as we do civic engagement, as we move into political engagement, as we do anything where we're working with other people, it's going to get messy because we see the world not as it is, but as we are. And there's this concept, it could be considered a theory of change that I call the 5 E's. And so in several of the activities that we've done with Listen Kansas and helping people learn about their own biases and where they got their biases and how they were formed and who gave them those earliest messages, right? There were some themes that just kept coming up over and over and over and over and over. It got to be where it was very predictable. And it always broke down to somebody would mention they are essentially a product of their environment, their education, their experiences, their exposure, and their level of empathy. At first, I didn't put in the empathy and it was just the 4 E's, but really the level of empathy can have a huge impact on how we see and interact with the world. And so all of these 5 E's really do kind of interrelate. Your environment could be where you live, right? Or where you work, or where you go to school. It's something that you really don't often change. And your environment then is leads to like your exposure, who you're exposed to, what you're exposed to, what kind of education and experience you're exposed to. So all of these really do interrelate and it's hard to piece them out. But when we ask people, where did they learn certain things, right? Where did they first learn certain messages? All of these different pieces come to light. So this is one of my favorite graphics to show people as we talk about how we see the world compared to how other people see the world. There's a whole leadership presentation that I can do on multiple interpretations and the way that we see the world is not necessarily the way other people see the world, and how can we get outside of our own interpretation to start asking what other people's experiences may be. And if you're going to do leadership, I think that's essential. But for this presentation, I'm just going to stick with like, this is still part of the 5 E's, right? Like our education, our experiences, our exposure, our environment, level of empathy shape how we see the world. So I think you can see my little dot here. If I'm standing right here as a white, cisgender, straightish, heteroflexible female in Kansas, this is my truth, right? This is absolutely true for me. But for a trans youth, a Black trans youth in rural Kansas, this is their truth. And both can be true, absolutely. And you have to be able to see and hear and experience. You can't necessarily experience both, but you have to be able to be open to the experience of learning about what somebody else's perspective is to also see the full truth. And I love this next slide, right? So this is something you can find. I wish I could give artist credit for this to somebody, but it's just randomly on the internet with no, the word has just escaped me, no artist on it. So feel free to Google true and truth and perspectives, and you'll probably find this. So this one just says, actually, that's a false dichotomy. There are more than 2 sides to it, right? Absolutely. There's so many different perspectives. If all of those 5 E's shape who we are, just think of in any room and even in any household, how many different perspectives, in any business, how many different perspectives there are going to be, how many different things that are true to the person living it. And your perspective on reality may not be wrong, but that doesn't mean you're the only one who might have some insight on the truth. So again, being really open-minded. This is all just about being open-minded, that you're a product of those 5 E's and somebody else is a product of theirs. And it doesn't mean our experiences are the same at all. So here's where we get to, what do the 5 E's do? Why are they important for this work, right? In advocacy work, when I was working with educators or legislators or local politicians or even parents, sometimes unaffirming parents, right? And I needed to get them to open their heart and their minds to LGBTQ youth. I had to recognize, or I did recognize early, that first I could have empathy for their beliefs, their behavior, because they were a product of the 5 E's. I have to think, it's gonna make my eyes water. I feel like I'm very lucky that I grew up with the environment, education, experiences, and exposure and empathy that I did. Those things, the things that my parents gave me about people were a gift, right? The earliest messages that I have about people and embracing diversity and celebrating diversity were a gift. Not everybody had that. My education, all of the different education that I did, I was doing, we called it multicultural studies, right? Before it was like diversity, equity, inclusion. I did that back 20, 25 years ago. So my education gave me a lot of perspective that I then used in my work. My experiences of my work. My first teaching job was teaching in Emporia, Kansas, in what was a segregated school. And I taught, it was Newcomer Literacy Center. So students who were new to America from Spanish-speaking countries. My job was to help teach them English in 6 weeks, which is a bad setup. Just don't do that. But those experiences really shaped who I was, right? And the exposure that I had in those sittings shaped part of who I was and the advocacy that I would end up doing later. So being willing to think about those things for another person, I think, is very important, right? That they didn't have those same experiences I did. So anytime I meet with somebody who isn't quite sure how to support LGBTQ youth, or isn't really sure they even want to, we get plenty of those in Kansas, right? I have to figure out, what do they need from me? What do they need from our community? What do they need from their peers? What do they need from their pastor, right? And so I ask questions, because that's kind of my form of leadership. I need to understand, do they need education? Do they need experiences? Do they need exposure? I have learned that people will not necessarily love it if you're throwing these keys at them and they haven't asked for them, right? If you throw education at them and that's not really what they want, they may not love it. And maybe they need an experience, maybe they need exposure. We're definitely seeing a lot more parents become affirming when they have, and grandparents and aunts and uncles, right? When they have LGBTQ youth in their families, it changes things. That exposure is a big piece. So all of these pieces are important. All of these 5 E's are important in changing somebody's heart and mind. But it's also not about necessarily changing them. It's about meeting them where they are and giving them that space and time to grow. There's an analogy I use a lot when I was working with youth, because they would want policies changed right now. They'd want teachers changed right now. And I'd say, like, this is great, and I do too. And you can't turn a ship, like a cruise ship, can't turn 180 degrees with one turn. It has to take lots of little turns, right? And all of these keys can create those little turns for people. I've never met a single person who was anti-LGBT, and after one conversation, I had the magic key that like just flipped it 180 degrees, right? Like, that's never happened. But I have met people who were uncertain, and I would provide them a little bit of education, or I'd ask a question and I'd invite them for an experience, or I would, give more education, or I would challenge them to get outside of their own comfort zone and their own ease, and choose to have some education, experiences, exposure on their own, maybe even choose a different environment if that's possible for some people. So we take those 5 E's, we take the keys, right? Again, in my work, I try to make sure I'm not just throwing keys at people. Though, when we do lobbying, that's sometimes what we do. We just collect as many testimonies as we can, and we just throw the keys at people. We hope something fits into the right lock, and there's all these different legislators with all these different locks, right? So it really helps to know what somebody's key is, right? Asking the questions, and maybe they have a specific concern that they need the answer to. again, sorry, I shouldn't have gone to the next slide yet. Again, like I did education on how to do allyship for LGBTQ youth, and had a team of 35 professional development folks across the state who worked on a team to ensure that teachers knew these things. And we taught a lot of content, a ton of content. So you can't just give a person a piece of content, like all the content, right? Some of our workshops were 6 hours. Some people came to our workshops twice, the 6 hour workshops twice, because they liked it so much. And you just really can't absorb all 6 hours worth in one session. And so you need time, you need space. People have to have time to digest those things. So taking those 5 keys, or taking that principle from the 5 keys, 5 E's, oh, keys, 5 keys also. Taking those to working across factions and using some leadership principles and meshing the two has been really helpful for me. And I want to make sure that I state right now that this is not intended to be something to manipulate somebody to get your way, right? And it's about using leadership skills so that we can make progress on our challenges. For me, a lot of times my progress or my challenge is making sure LGBTQ students feel safe, valued, and respected. What that looks like can look differently, right? But if I make progress, I need to use these tools and skills. So the next few slides come from information from the Kansas Leadership Center. I wanted to go ahead and put that source in there. And when we talk about factions, first of all, like, what is a faction, right? We have a lot of factions in Kansas. If I'm sure you step outside your door, your cul-de-sac or your neighborhood may be filled with factions. If you go to work, they're filled with factions. So a faction is a group of people who share common values. They're loyal to the same things. They share a common orientation to the work, and it's described in noble terms usually. So I want to just dig in on 3 different pieces of the factions as we're working across factions. And this is something that since I learned this at KLC, and it was like the aha moment, it was kind of what I was already doing, but this provided a framework for it that just made it almost like a formula that I could go through and really think about it in an intentional way. So the values are deeply held beliefs, often which are based on a significant life experience or how you were raised, right? So your environment, your education, your experiences all play into the values that you hold. Oftentimes we have values that we don't even know we have. Sometimes we have competing values if we feel anxious, or if we feel uncomfortable, or if we feel stuck, it's often because we have competing values. That's a whole nother conversation. And if you're in that spot and would like some leadership coaching to help you get out of that, feel free to give me a call. I love coaching people through some of that. One of the next definitions is for loyalties then. So loyalties are a dedication to a group, a place, people, or a way of doing things. And unfortunately, loyalties often trump values. One example that I'm going to use right now is just like, my mind is all on legislation, right? So there are several legislators that would love to vote in support of youth. Their values are that discrimination is wrong, that what discrimination leads to, right? The hostility, the suicidality, all of that is wrong. And if we can stop it, we should. That's what their values are. But their loyalties are to the Republican Party or to their party, right? I don't mean to make this like a partisan piece, but like so far, and I can show off the live at the end, I can show a list of the different legislators and how they voted on this in the past. And there's a partisan divide there. But we have to work across partisan lines, right? We have to work across party lines. We have to work across factions to be able to make progress on this. But that was one example. Loyalties can often be to a group or a way of doing things and trump a person's values. And that often causes a lot of internal conflict. And so then definition of losses. Losses are things that we give up if progress is made. This is a hard one. We have loss of control, maybe, loss of prestige, loss of comfort or familiarity. We anticipate loss and we see this as a risk we may not be willing to take. So we have our own values and loyalties, And loss is whatever is going to hurt us, right? Make us uncomfortable, make us lose our job, make us lose our position. We deal with loss. If you're doing allyship, you're going to deal with loss, right? If you're an LGBTQ person living in Kansas, you're going to experience loss. And sometimes we try to buffer that loss by not taking risks. And to do leadership, you have to take risks, right? But also, when we're working across factions, the other group has something to lose too. If we make progress on our challenge, the other group is going to stand to lose something. And so what is it that they have to lose? And how can we speak to that loss and make it less hard for them to lose? So here's another Kansas Leadership Center resource. This is a worksheet that's called, it's a faction map worksheet. And what happens is your issue goes here in the middle, and then I just blew up this one up here in the corner, over here to the side. So you put the faction in it. If I'm doing things with the legislative session, I don't usually actually write my factions down anymore. I just kind of do it in my head, but I might put a specific group of legislators, or I might just put an individual there too. For me, it helps to see each person's values, loyalties, and losses as well, because they both operate independently, but as a group sometimes up there, right? So what are their values? What are their loyalties going to be? And what are their losses? And here's where it gets tricky, and where the civic engagement piece is going to come up soon. We don't always know what a person's values and loyalties and losses are. We may think we know based on party affiliation, or based on where they're from, or based on where they went to school, or based on the color of their skin or their orientation, but we don't necessarily know where those come from. And so that's where we have to be curious. We have to ask questions, and we have to find out what are their sticking points, what are their values, and having those conversations is how we figure out how to fill this out, even if it's mentally, and then get to this point of the loss. When we know what somebody's loss is and what they value, then we can really talk to them about affirming that loss, right? Loss of comfort is scary for a lot of people. My entire job is centered around helping people feel comfortable with discomfort. So there are a lot of people that just will not do allyship. They will not speak out. They will not even affirm their own children because they're afraid of losing status with their church, or losing the status or respect of their families, right? And so when we understand that that is a loss that they're dealing with, when we can speak to that, when we can give them empathy for that, when we can help them through that loss, it makes it easier for them to align with their values. So this is a really important piece. Another piece on this is a whole, working across factions is a whole workshop in its own as well, right? But this can be helpful too. The degree to which they care about my issue, 1 to 10, and the degree to which I need them in order to make progress. There are some legislators who are those ones that you just may need, right? There are some teachers in your school that you may need to really have on your side. And knowing kind of where they fall on that. Do they care? Do they not care? How do I get them to care, right? That's where the empathy piece can come in sometimes. And knowing what keys you need to throw at them. Maybe we shouldn't throw things at people, but so ways to get civically engaged. Use your skills in your community, right? Now, I just want to say this is not a comprehensive list of ways you can get civically engaged. The list is as long as there are people, but these are the ones that I'm going to focus on for the rest of this presentation. So use your skills in your community, right? You have talents, you have maybe treasure, you have time, maybe, right? I'm saying maybe because not everybody has talent, time, and treasure, but you definitely have at least one of those things that you can use for your community. And so use those in your community to try to find what's going right and how you can contribute to that. There is a nonprofit. I'm going to not go into that slide or that topic on the next slide, so I just want to say this now. There's a nonprofit called Neighboring Movement, and they do asset-based community development. which is not looking at what's going wrong and what needs fixing in a community necessarily, but taking what's going right and how do they build on those? How do they use the skills and the talent and the treasure and the time that people have in that community to do something awesome, right? And I have done some leadership development with small rural communities as well on filling that gap, right? Understanding what are the challenges and what needs to happen, and what do we aspire to be in our community, and then what needs to happen in the middle, and helping people use their skills and their talents to do that. So think about some way that you can use your skills in your community to help with something. I'm going to go into the next three a little bit more in depth than the next slides, but just engage with local politicians, help get out the votes, all caps as a title, because that's important, and run for office. And if any of you instantly are like, not me, when I say run for office, I just want you to sit with that for a little bit, and we're going to talk about it more, because I think, yes, you. So engage with local politicians. How do you get engaged with local politicians? Well, you can call, you can email, you can do an in-person visit, you can send postcards, always follow up with a thank you. You can probably engage with them in other ways. I have engaged with local ones out and about around town, right? If you're in a small town or even a town the size of Wichita, you may run into them. You may be able to invite them out to dinner or to lunch. When we're doing like the legislators at the Kansas level, you can still do those other pieces. Legislators, politicians, elected officials are more likely to listen to you if you're one of their constituents. So create that relationship with the legislators who you live in their district, right? Start calling them, start emailing them. Don't just do it once, but like try to get to know them, try to have those conversations with them. Try to, in your mind, build out that faction map. What are their values, loyalties, losses? How can you work with them to help them mitigate their losses so that we can make progress on our challenge, right? And you can do that in any of these ways. If you have questions about how to do any of these pieces, you're welcome to message me, email me afterwards at any time. I do have some handouts, and my website is not up yet. I'll mention this at the beginning or at the end again. But by middle of April, I hope to have my website completed and done. And there will be some resources up on the website too about ways to get engaged, right? If you're going to write a letter or send an email, what might that look like, right? So there are lots of ways to do that. Don't just not do it because you're like, I don't know what I'd say, right? Reach out to somebody like me who can help you think through that. So engaging with local politicians more. Resources, there's the Kansas legislature website and the report back form from the Center of Daring. I'm going to get into both of those two things briefly. So I mentioned at the beginning, I was apolitical and I was kind of unengaged, and I didn't know who my legislators were. I didn't know who my elected officials were. I couldn't have told you. If somebody would have told me to call or email my legislator, I'd been like, yeah, I feel dumb because I don't know any of those things. And I think that becomes a barrier for civic engagement too, right? So I'm always out here saying there is no shame. If you don't know who your legislator is, if you don't know who your mayor is, that's okay. Just look it up, right? It's okay. There are a lot of people out there that aren't civically engaged. In fact, I actually had the numbers written down for a presentation last week. Just in, well, this may be not a great example, but in the 2020 primary, only 34.2% of registered voters went out to vote in Kansas. In the 2020 general election, 70.9% of registered voters went out. 2020 was a big election year. So, but in an off season, in the midterm, that changed. Like 2018, the primary was 23.2%, and the general election was 55.9%. So less than a quarter of people are even voting in the primary elections. So there are a lot of people who are not engaged. So don't feel bad if you don't know what you don't know yet. We'll just help you, give you the tools to do that, to learn. So on the Kansas legislature website, I'm going to go to this website right now, and we can put this link in the comments too. Brandon, are you able to grab that and drop it in the chat?
Yep.
Okay. So The Kansas legislature website is pretty easy to use. If you need to know who your legislator is, there's this tool right here that says find your legislator, right? You can find a specific bill. If you want to look up SB 484 and what it's about and where it is and all of that, you can also use the search the site. It's pretty easy to navigate. You can even look at previous committees. One of the things that I like to do is look at the House and Senate leadership, right? You can look at leadership or you can look at the entire roster, and that has all of the legislators. If you wanted to email all of the representatives, they're all right here. I'm gonna scroll back up to the top. When you click on one, let's go for, do you know who your representative is down there, Brandon? I could do a Wichita one. Who was it? Oh, sorry to put you on the spot.
Yeah, it's been a long day.
That's okay.
And I think our representative, Independence is split into like 2 districts, and I can't. Doug
Actually,
one. Doug
one written down.
And no.
I'll grab this one. He's mine. Representative Seiwert. So Joe Seiwert, it has him on here. It has what, don't feel bad, Brandon, at all. And I'm sorry I put you on the spot. Again, like we don't know all these things because they don't always affect us. And if somebody put me on the spot, I'd have forgotten Seiwert was mine as well, right? Completely, I would have forgotten that he's my representative and Kirshen's my senator. People have asked me that and I've completely forgotten in the moment. I don't, these are not, I forget my own children's names too though, so. Okay, so here it has Capitol office, phone number, the email address, so you can email him right there, right? It even tells you a little bit about his background. His business is occupation, agricultural business owner. And it even has then the office number. I think I said that a second ago, the office number where he is in the Capitol. So if you are visiting in person, you can just pull these up. When I'm visiting the Capitol, I have on my phone one that's the House and one that's the Senate roster pulled up on my phone. So when I need to meet with somebody, I just have to click on their name and I can find where their office is. It also tells you what committees they're in, and so you'll know maybe what times that they're going to be available. The House has a meeting every day at 11 a.m. Actually, it says, yeah, adjourned until 11 a.m. So every day at 11 a.m. And then he's also in meetings at 3:30 and 1:30 daily. And so if you're trying to make an appointment with them to talk, you'll know, looking at that schedule might help you give the receptionist or the assistant some time. If you do call this number, it's going to be an assistant at the Capitol who will help put you on the schedule. Be really nice to the assistants because they are typically really nice and they are your gateway to these legislators. Okay, so I'm going to go back to my presentation if I can find it. There we go. So the Kansas legislature website, if you go and you meet with a legislator, whether it's by email or by phone or whatever, you have a conversation with them in some way or another, you ask some questions, you hear their concerns. We would love, I have a team that is working on SB 484 specifically. We'd love for you to give us feedback on what you discovered, right? That helps us also know who else do we need to send? What key do we need to send? Do we need more? Do they need to hear from a researcher who has data? Do they need to hear from a doctor who has science? Do they need to hear from a parent of a trans kid, right? Do they need to hear from a trans kid? So that helps us know what they need, what exposure, what experiences, what education they need that we can help make progress on. So I'm gonna skip that though. When we go off live, we'll come back to that form. So help get out the vote. This is a great one. I really wish, this is where I would love to see your hands, like who's helped participate in getting out the vote before. Again, as an apolitical person, I had never done that. I was like, oh, that sounds like no fun. Even though I'm an extrovert, walking door to door knock and hand out things in the July heat does not sound like any fun to me. So thankfully, there are a lot of options for getting engaged and helping get out the vote. You could volunteer with a local campaign. There's always going to be somebody in your area that could use your support, whether they want you to door knock or make phone calls or do text. But there's a new tool that I've been using called Voter to Voter. And again, this is a nonpartisan tool. It is open to anybody to use. I put the link to my team on there, but you're welcome to go on and make your own team. You're welcome to join like this big statewide voter to voter team. But my Kansas Catalyst team is a way to contact only your own friends and family. Like for a lot of people, that really appeals, right? They don't want to go knock on strangers' doors or call strangers. And so you can just input your friends and family. It gives you some information about like if they're likely to vote or not. If they're not likely to vote, you can start calling them and asking them like, hey, are you registered to vote? Do you know where your polling site is? All of that. The voter to voter turnout has been incredible. The numbers at the end of the year when they share like how our group has helped get out the vote, it's always incredible. It seems like if every person is only calling 10 people, that's not going to make a huge impact. But if everybody did it, that makes a huge impact, right? Like if some small areas lose or win by 100 votes. And so 10 times 10 is you've got your votes that you need, right? So voter to voter is a great engagement tool to help get out the vote. I'm gonna go to this next one that gives people anxiety, run for office. So I'm gonna say like, yes, you run for office, right? So many people are like, I can't run for office. I don't know anything about running for office. You can start small. You don't have to start with state legislature. Start with your local school board or start with local city council. Start for something small and local and make a difference there. That's part of civic engagement. That's part of political engagement. I forgot to define civic engagement. Civic engagement doesn't have to be political, but we're kind of focusing on the political part. But civic engagement is just using your skills to better your community. So by running for office, you may be the exposure that some people need. You may be able to provide the experiences that a whole community needs, right? You may be able to provide the education that lots of folks need. And again, if we go back to that exposure piece, it is so important. Right now, we only have 4 LGBTQ legislators in the state capital in Kansas. But even those 4 legislators will say that their presence there has made a huge difference. The exposure that other legislators have gotten, they can no longer say they don't know a gay man. They can no longer say they don't know a trans woman because they're there in the Capitol and they're interacting. And so your presence can make a difference. If thinking about running for office, you're still like, yeah, no, Liz, that's not happening. And you're just completely dismissing it. I want to just challenge you to sit with it for a minute and ask why. Like, what scares you about that, or what maybe you don't have time, maybe you don't have the treasure, the money needed to run for office. Some of those local elections don't cost any money, they don't require anything. But whatever you are worried about, feel free to message me, and we'll see if maybe we can't find the right key for you too, right? I really, really would love to see more Kansans doing leadership, doing allyship, running for office. And I'll provide you with the tools and resources. There's another nonprofit that helps people who want to run for office too, gives them trainings, all kinds of things. It's really awesome. So we're at the end of this part of the presentation, and I closed every presentation with Lissa in Kansas that I did with teachers, closed with this quote, which is ultimately how I got the name of my business after several months of trying to decide what to name my business. And I altered the quote to not have it gender specific, but it says, each time a person stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others, they send forth a tiny ripple of hope. And crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. Again, when you get civically engaged, you become one of those. You probably already are one of those. The fact that you're even participating in this presentation, right, or watching it later, you are doing something. You're wanting to get engaged in some way. Whatever is in your way, let's work on it, right? If you're having a hard time figuring out how to get engaged or need some more support and resources, let us know, because when we all get engaged, then we can also be the ripples that build a current that sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. and be those Center of Darings. Here's my contact information for Center of Daring. Again, I do have a team. We do some content presentations right now, though I'm helping another nonprofit start that I hope a lot of the content presentations will start going through that. I do leadership trainings, leadership consulting. I'm helping with some action planning, strategic planning. I'm working with organizations to help them create safer, more inclusive climates, really cultures of courage within their organizations, right? Helping them lean into that discomfort of talking about how to once they have the content for the diversity, equity, inclusion, and how to embrace identities that are different from their own, or embrace identities in their community, how do they implement that? That's the part that where a lot of organizations get stuck, because it's scary. It's scary in Kansas, right? There's that risk. They have loss. They're going to lose some comfort. And so a lot of what I do is help people be uncomfortable, acknowledge they're afraid, and do the thing anyway. So again, the website's not going to be up until the middle of April probably, but you're welcome to go there, and there will be free resources there as soon as that is up. So I think I'm going to unshare my screen now. And Brandon, if you want to invite folks to join us.
Yes, so if you're viewing, feel free. The link to our Zoom is in the chat, in the comments. I want to thank you, Liz, for spending the evening with us and giving a wonderful presentation with a ton of information. I did have a couple questions. One was from the Facebook event page. Kate asked, how do you stay engaged with politics that matter when you're frustrated with partisanship / party politics?
Yeah, so again, I remind myself, I'm gonna cry. I remind myself that the people are a product of their 5 E's, right? So it just helps me get back on the balcony. It helps me realize that their vote, their opinion, whatever, may even be in conflict with their own values. I live in a bipartisan household, and so we work across factions a lot in this house. And I know that my job, my work would not have been possible without the support of my spouse. And so I think that partisan politics do get gross, and the partisan platforms and some of the pieces, but I just remind myself that not everybody in those parties, either party, when something's gross, right, aligns with that, right? They may have a loyalty to that thing, whatever it is, that topic, that bill, that piece of legislation, or even that like ideology, but it conflicts with their own values. I think that's where we just have to, that's where I go back to the kind of like balcony and just remind myself, how do we get them to be courageous, right? How do we engage with them? What do they need from us to be courageous and do courageous leadership? I don't know if that's my answer. I don't know if it's a good one.
And then I had a question. You mentioned a nonprofit that does neighborhood assessments.
Yeah, it's Neighboring Movement. I don't think it does neighborhood assessments exactly, but it's called Neighboring Movement. And they do asset-based community development. They have a bunch of different kinds of things. They do like rural civic engagement as well. Adam Barlow Thompson is the person in charge of that.
I heard you talk about it, and my library hat came on, and I was like, oh, I need to write that down. So thank you.
Yeah, I definitely, and I'm happy afterwards to send some information for that nonprofit as well. They do a lot of really great things. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I invite everybody who's viewing to follow the Zoom link in the comments and join us for a live Q&A. We'll stay on the line for about 5 minutes for people to get logged in. So we'll see you shortly.